So, if you're in full-time employment in South Africa, chances are you and your employer are contributing to a pension fund. I think it's low, but I'm not really going to look into it, but I'm pretty sure it is. But if you count it, your pension is actually the biggest part of your portfolio, particularly if you aren't investing when you just started investing. And I think there's a big problem with that. The problem that I have is that the biggest part of your investment portfolio, you have no control over it. Now, initially I wanted to make a video complaining about how badly invested most of our pension funds are, particularly if you take into consideration the previous video I made about JSE stocks and just the bad growth that you get on them. I mean, I looked at my pension fund that's with Sundam, and it's so complicated to try and find out where my savings are being invested, what level of risk they're taking, and where those funds are sitting exactly. Found a lot of things I didn't like. But before I made a video judging Sundam and other financial institutions, I decided to do some research. And from that research, first thing I need to say is a big apology to all of the pension fund companies. I doubted you and I questioned your investment strategy. Whereas the truth is that you had no choice. Your hands were tied behind your back by a little something that called Regulation 28. Now, Regulation 28 of the Pension Funds Act, I think it is, puts a limitation or restrictions on how retirement funds can invest or where they can invest to the funds you contribute. The Act basically says that your pension fund has to invest within the following restrictions. It has to have a maximum of 75% in local equity, a maximum of 25% in listed property, 30% in offshore assets and 10% in hedge funds. So what this means is that at most 75% of your pension can be invested in companies or shares, for lack of a better term. You can't invest more than 25% of your pension fund into listed property. That would be REITs like Redefined Properties, Hyprop and Vugile. Not more than 30% in offshore assets, meaning anything like Facebook, Apple, Google, and Tesla. I'm sure this also includes currencies like holding USD cash. I'm also pretty sure it includes bonds from other markets. So having, American or United Kingdom bonds, for example. And finally, your pension cannot invest more than 10% into hedge funds. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I love offshore equity. Things like the S&P 500 and NASDAQ just get me going because, in my opinion, they offer more growth for potential than JSE or JSE listed companies. So saying that the most that your portfolio can actually invest into these markets or companies, 30%, for me is really crippling your pension's wings. And if you take the full 30%, it means you can only use a further 45% to invest in local equity. What this means is that all pension funds in South Africa pretty much have similar investment strategies that pretty much try their best to preserve your capital as much as they can rather than run the risk of losing money, which when you're closer to the age of retirement is a good thing. But for me, at the age of 25, when I'm 40 years away from retirement, capital preservation shouldn't be a priority. For me, I think between the ages of 18 and 30, pension funds should be allowed to be as risky as they dare to be, so that you can have as much money as possible for when you hit your 30s to build a solid retirement. Then, once a worker gets to their 30s, you can start to shift to a less and less aggressive strategy, maybe until you're 5 years out from retirement, and then you can start looking at preservation. And I mean, to add insult to injury, I understand this thing they call prescribed assets will be coming in quite soon, which in of itself is a horrible idea, but viva Congolose, right? We'll talk about this another day because I think it's very interesting to know what's actually going on here. But let's get into what I actually wanted to talk about today, which is where your pension fund is invested. Now, I'm going to be looking at the following products and where they've been invested. Now, keep in mind the financial services industry is looking for any way to make a buck out of us. So most pension funds have invested all of your money into a whole lot of other funds. Now, whether this is to rake up fees or to diversify, I'm not sure. But what I've picked or made up was really hard to track and get the performance of each pension fund, but this is the best I could do. So let's take a look at the following 4 pension funds, namely being Old Mutual Super Fund, Sundam's Umbrella Fund, Momentum Funds at Work, and the Government Employees Pension Fund. So let's start with the Old Mutual Super Fund. So your employers, should they select Old Mutual as the administrators of your pension, give them a few options with the super fund. The first and the simplest being the easy, which is the option I'm going to look at, which puts your entire contribution into one fund. This fund is the absolute stable growth, which aims to beat inflation by about 2 to 3%. But you do have other choices with Old Mutual, like the super fund choice. You can choose by risk profile and also by your package option. But as I said, we're going to be dealing with the easy because, well, it's easy. So the Absolute Stable Fund has almost 20% of the fund already invested into South African government bonds. This will be good for when prescribed assets become a thing in terms of the regulation, but there are other unintended knock-on effects that we'll highlight the day we actually speak about prescribed assets and maybe why it's not going to be the best thing in the world. But on the equity side, about 2.3% of the fund, or the funds you put into the fund, are invested into NASPAS, 1.6% invested into Anglo American, 1.5% into First Rand, about 1.7% into British American Tobacco, and about 1% into Process. Now, notice how they've played it quite safe here, and personally, if I was an employer, I wouldn't be choosing this one. I think there are much better options. Next up, we're going to be looking at the Sundam Umbrella Fund, and this one is even more confusing. But to make things simple for me, I've chosen one of the packages called the Life Stage Accumulation Portfolio. I think this is the one that you get when you're more than 6 years out from retiring, meaning it should be slightly more aggressive. Equities make about 53% of the entire portfolio, and within that 53%, NASPAS makes about 14.5%, Anglo American makes up 4.1%, British American Tobacco makes up 3.9%, Process takes about 3.5%, and First Rand makes up 3.3%. I believe if you want to get the estimated percentage of the total impact each of these have on your entire portfolio, I would say divide it by about 2, and that should give you more or less the number that you're looking for. So for example, NASPAS would make up 7% of your pension fund portfolio. Next, we're going to look at momentum funds at work. From Momentum, I think they also have a lot of options like everyone else does, but we'll be looking at their default offering, which is the Life Stage. In the portfolio, about 50% of the total fund is in equities. In the portfolio, NASPAS takes up about 5.63%, First Rand takes 2.43%, Anglo American takes 2.26%, and Impala Platinum takes up about 2.25%. Lastly, Standard Bank takes up 1.77%. This fund does target inflation plus 5%, which I think is quite good. But as well, it's also linked to how close you are to retirement. So the closer you are, the less risk that they'll take. Finally, we're going to look at the Government Employees Pension Fund. Now, the Government Employees Pension Fund doesn't open up about a lot of information about where things are invested. In my opinion, they've actually gone a really long way to tell you all about the administration, who they have working where, doing what, but not a lot about how they've actually invested. Also, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what percentage of the entire portfolio actually belongs to listed companies, but what I can tell you is that of the money that they have in local equities, about 22% is invested into NASPAS, 6.3% into Process, 4.7% into Anglo American, 3.7% into British American Tobacco, and about 4.3% into Vodacom. I believe the local equities make up about 55% of the fund, so pretty much the same as before, divided by 2 to sort of get the overall weighting that it has from the complete fund. Now, from all of this, one thing is clear. NASPAS is clearly in control of all of our financial futures. But no, really, what I'm trying to show is that most pension funds have kind of all gone for the same combination of companies: your NASPAS, Anglo American, First Rand, and Process. These are all the biggest companies in each of the different pension fund portfolios. But there's also other cameos from other biggish companies like your British American Tobacco, Vodacom, Standard Bank, and Impala Plat. But keep in mind that these are only the top 5 equities in each of these pension funds. There's a significantly longer list of all of the companies that are there in and amongst what has been chosen. Now, depending on your viewpoint about all that I've just told you, you'll either think it's a good or it's a bad thing. Personally, for me, it's a bad thing. And I think Andre 3000 has a line where he says, selling's a sin, while so is telling young men that selling's a sin if you don't offer new ways to win. So I think the easiest or the best way to sort of mitigate all of this is to actually get investing in something offshore. I know a lot of people will say maybe you should take out a retirement annuity to sort of supplement your normal retirement, and all that is doing is just putting more money into the same funds, which in theory will actually give you a better retirement, yes, because you would have put more in, but in terms of returns, it's not actually any better. Personally, for me, what I would do, I would look at companies or the same institutions, but try to get products that have, better growth over a longer period of time. A nice one that I always like to speak about is the Old Mutual Global Equity Fund, which over the last 10 years has had a pretty stable return of about 18% per year on average. Something like that, quoted for the next 30, 40 years, would far outbeat any kind of pension fund that you're in. And I know one would say maybe the tax implications of that are significantly more than the way it would be in retirement, but I would then respond to them and also say that even though there are tax benefits that you get from putting money in your pension fund and in a retirement annuity, at the end of the day, when you want to make a withdrawal from that pension fund, you're still going to pay tax. So in my opinion, damned if you do, damned if you don't. The way I would go, just to sort of supplement your overall retirement, is start with a small amount, put it towards something like, I've said, the Global Equity Fund. A small amount of money, just as your retirement would, every month for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And trust me, you'll be thanking me come retirement time. And as always, this has been your boy, Pro MG Money. I hope this video helped someone. It did take me a bit of time, and I think in future I would actually like to, properly go over one of the offerings and see fully, to the last cent where the money is being invested, because a lot of this as well, like I said, there's bonds, and I was very vague about the bonds. Bonds are a whole other thing that can be good and can work quite well for an overall portfolio in terms of just having diversity. But what it actually means to have those government bonds, I think, being from South Africa and knowing that if you lend money to the government, they're just going to take that money, give it to Eskom, who's just going to give it to the Guptas, kind of is counterproductive. So maybe we'll dissect one of these funds and actually really look where these bonds are and what the government actually does with those specific bonds that we are essentially loaning them money for, and what the returns you can expect to be like on those specific bonds, because that is part of what a bond actually does. As always, keep in mind that we do have our giveaway of over 50,000 Rand throughout the year. Obviously, on the condition that we reach that subscriber count by the end of this year. And yeah, keep on watching. I hope this has been somewhat informative to you. It definitely has been to me. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.